Hello, everybody. We're running live here. This is February 2nd, 2021. And today we'll be talking about consequentialism. So that's a normative ethical theory. We've been talking about quite a bit of value theory to this point, theories of well-being, theories of goodness. Now we're going to turn our attention to some normative ethical theories, normative value theories. So let me go ahead and get the closed captions going. And I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. So again, we'll be talking about consequentialism. So I put together, a PowerPoint presentation. Let's drop that down. Make sure I didn't miss anybody here real quick. Let me stop sharing for a moment. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to segue to the presentation I put together for today. Okay, so good. So consequentialism, that's our topic. So here's, obviously this is an image of the trolley problem, the original trolley problem, or one way of representing it anyways. You got a guy at a switch, the trolley zooming along, has a choice to make, redirect the trolley to the 1 or allow the trolley to smash and kill the 5. Okay, so our discussion of consequentialism will be guided by William Shaw's paper, Consequentialism. He's a professor of philosophy at San Jose State University. Let's begin with the basics. Okay, so again, we're segueing away from value theory to normative theory. And consequentialism is our first normative ethical theory. We're going to see it has a close connection to value theory anyways. So in slogan form, consequentialism could be understood as the view, promote goodness, where the promote goodness claim should be understood maybe in imperatival form. It's not just a friendly suggestion that you bring about goodness, but it's required of you that you do. So maybe you could understand it as promote goodness exclamation mark to capture the fact that this is an imperative, not a friendly suggestion. So questions when you think about just this slogan. We're going to get more sophisticated soon, but some of the basics to ask: what does promote mean and what does goodness mean? So we'll begin thinking about consequentialism in this way. It's just a very general kind of theory. We can maybe call it a skeletal theory because it can be developed in various ways. There's different ways of adding flesh to the bones, if I could put it that way. And initially, the kind of consequentialism that we develop will be in part determined by how we define promote and how we define goodness, or how we define good consequences. Think about the theory, it's called consequentialism for a reason. So presumably what's going to count as right is going to be related to good consequences, and what's wrong will be the absence of good consequences, or even bad consequences, as the case may be. Okay, so again, keep in mind that goodness in the promote goodness slogan is understood in terms of good consequences. So that's a relevant goodness. And the good consequences will be the overall good consequences. Okay, so you might be weighing in bad consequences, but you have to weigh those against the other consequences to see what the overall consequences are in a situation, and those will determine whether the action was morally right or morally wrong, or even morally neutral, as the case may be. Okay, so we'll go a bit beyond the slogan form now. So consequentialism could be understood as the moral theory claiming that the morally right action in any scenario is to promote good consequences overall. What's the normative moral theory? put it that way if you wanted to, claiming that the morally right action in any scenario is to promote good consequences overall. Okay. So now, again, going beyond the slogan form, the moral theory claiming that the fundamental normative principle or requirement or duty or obligation is to bring about good consequences overall. You know, these all have, these are all related to each other. Can't get that to fit the same line, but that's okay. Any questions or comments about any of that? About how requirement, duty, and obligation are related. They all mean roughly the same thing. Okay. So promoting is to be understood in terms of bringing about. Okay. Not just trying to bring about, but bringing about. Okay. So, promoting something might have different meanings. So I'm trying to just get clear as to what the relevance of promoting is. So kind of bringing about, making the case, something like that. And there are two ways consequentialists have defined the relevant meaning of quote unquote bringing about good consequences. One is where we define promoting as maximizing. So one is to bring about the most good, to bring about the best overall consequences. So when you bring about good consequences and you maximize the bringing about of good consequences, you've brought about the best consequences. And just traditionally, this is the most common form of consequentialism, these maximizing versions of the view. So when we take the slogan, promote goodness, you can understand the slogan here. We're thinking about the maximizing idea as promote the best. Okay, and one is obligated to do the best on such views. And then the second way we can understand promote is in terms of satisficing. And that just means to bring about enough of something, to bring about enough goodness. So satisficing obviously is not a word that you ordinarily learn in English, but it is a word that's been invented conceptually because we needed a term like it. So when we did some conceptual engineering or inventing of concepts, we created a term like this for it, promoting as satisficing. So wants to bring about enough for a satisfactory amount of goodness. As you can imagine, there are going to be issues figuring out what enough amounts to. Okay. But you might be asking, why would any consequentialist go this route, the route of being a satisficer as opposed to a maximizer? Well, it's because some people think that maximizing or having obligations to bring about the best consequences is just too demanding. So that has led some consequentialists to say, morality is demanding, but it's not demanding that we do what's best always. So that's a big picture reason why some philosophers, some consequentialists go satisficer as opposed to maximizers. Okay, so thinking just more about goodness here, consequentialists need to rely on or develop a value theory in order to define goodness. So this is the way in which a value theory is related to a normative theory. So keep in mind that consequentialism, it's a normative theory, but it depends on value theory. And it's going to depend in a very strong way. So keep in mind the difference between normative ethics and a value theory, or normative theory and a value theory, something I've harped on quite a bit so far, at least. So the dependence on value theory, as I've noted, is strong, and the way of capturing the strongness is in terms of universality and necessity. So the dependence on value theory is very strong. It's universal and necessary. And the way we capture the universality and necessity is here. It's necessary that every moral action is determined by the good consequences it brings about, according to consequentialism. So the essence of a right action, let's say essence, it's the nature of a right action, that captures the necessity point. And then every, that's the universality, right? Every is a universal term. Every more than right action is going to be determined by the good consequences it brings about. Okay, so there'll be other normative ethical theories that may have a dependence on the value theory, but it won't be as strong as this. So this is the strongest as it gets. Okay, so remember what a normative theory is, remember what a value theory is. It's just to refresh your memories in case you've forgotten. Normative theory is a theory of right action. Conversely, a theory of wrong action. Or even a theory of neutral action, an action that's neither right nor wrong, morally speaking. And then a value theory is a theory of good states of the world or bad states of the world. Okay, or even unbalanced neutral states of the world. Those are possibilities that get developed in the literature. Okay, so there's two kinds of good states of the world, as we know. Just by way of recap, there's intrinsically good and extrinsically good. Consequentialists traditionally try to identify what's intrinsically good, and they'll explain what's extrinsically good in terms of what's intrinsically good. It's a very common thing to do. So those things that are non-derivatively good explain why those things that are derivatively good, why they're good in the first place. Okay, and then this slide just a recapped point as well. So because you might be wondering, why do we need intrinsically good things? Why do we need intrinsically good states of the world? Why I think that they're fundamentally good? Because they're needed to explain why there was extrinsically good things in the first place. And relatedly, we talked about the idea about how without intrinsic good states of the world, then there wouldn't be any good states of the world. So insofar as you think there's goodness, you should think there's intrinsic goodness. Okay, so now back to goodness. So consequentialists, they need an account of goodness, an account of intrinsic goodness. And what they'll typically do is they'll develop a value theory, or at least have a value theory in mind as they're developing their consequentialism, and then define whether their version of consequentialism is maximizing or satisficing. And traditionally, the consequentialists would go maximizing, and they'd also go, they typically would go, they would typically define their value theory or develop their value theory in terms of some account of happiness, or pleasure even. Those are traditional ways of developing consequentialism. So in the Shaw paper, if you've had a chance to look at it, the most dominant form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which has been mentioned before. And those theories develop their value theory, happiness of all. Those are the intrinsically good states of the world. And then they traditionally would go maximizing, but they don't have to. Okay, and then I just note here, just keep in mind that consequentialists need an account of badness as well to account for what counts as wrong, morally wrong action. Okay, so they need an account of goodness in order to give us an account of good consequences, and then good consequences are going to be the way in which morally right actions, morally wrong actions will be defined, as the case may be. All right. So now putting everything together, consequentialism is a normative moral theory, a theory of right and wrong action. The normative moral theory maintaining that the primary fundamental moral obligation is to bring about intrinsically good consequences overall. A bit more complicated there. And then a normative moral theory that's universally and necessarily dependent on its value theory. So these will be important because when we talk about deontology next week, we'll see how it differs from consequentialism, and it differs from consequentialism in some of these abstract ways. Okay, I know some of this is abstract, so any questions or comments, clarifications needed? Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Sure.
So just to clarify, consequentialism is dependent on a value theory of their choosing in a way, or did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, of their choosing in the sense that they're rational choosing or something like that, right? There's different ways of being a consequentialist, and the consequentialism is in part going to be determined by what goodness is defined as or what badness is defined as. So, in a sense, it's of their choosing, but um, typically it's going to be argued for, right? Reasons will be provided for why pleasure is intrinsically good, the basis of the normative theory. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk a bit more about some aspects of consequentialism that are important, and a bit abstract too. But hopefully, we can make this stuff make sense. So, consequentialism entails that at least some good outcomes, some good consequences, are agent neutral. So think about outcomes as consequences, or results as also consequences. And so, what does it mean for an outcome to be agent neutral? That needs to be explained. And so I'm going to go beyond the Shaw here and try to capture what it means for an outcome to be considered agent neutral by using the original trolley case. So let's see here. We're slide 20. Let's do this. So we're back to our intro slide. So here we've got the 5 trolley workers, and we have the 1 trolley worker over here. This individual here has to make a decision about whether to direct the trolley to the 1 or allow the trolley to kill the 5. So kill 1 versus kill 5. And just like all things, like being equal, it seems as if there's a good outcome here that the person who's at the switch could bring about, right? And that would be directing the trolley toward the 1, right? We might say the good outcome here, or we might even say the best outcome here, where best is just the superlative of good. The best outcome here is to kill the 1. And we might just say that full stop, and that seems like that's a true statement. So far, is that okay? Well, if we're right in thinking that, it's true to say that the best outcome here in the original trolley case is to kill the 1 or to save the 5, we want to go that route, then it looks like that there's some outcomes that are agent neutral. I didn't have to qualify and say, oh, from the perspective of the 5 or from the perspective of the person who's at the switch, right, directing the trolley. Right? I didn't have to make any qualifications or relativizations, right, in order for the sentence to come out true. So we can think about agent neutrality initially in those terms. It's an outcomes agent is going to be agent neutral when we don't have to qualify um, the uh, the claim that we're making about the outcome being good. In any way, we don't have to qualify to any perspective. So contrast that with saying, well, from the vantage point of the 5, it's good for the 5 to be saved and or the 1 to be killed, right? We've qualified our good statement there, haven't we? We qualified the good outcome statement there. But from the vantage point of the 1, it's not good for him that the 5 are saved and that the trolley is directed toward the 1, right? I've done some relativizing. So sometimes we contrast an agent neutral outcome with an agent relative one because we relativize the goodness claim that we're making to an individual or a perspective or a group of individuals and their perspective. So the original trolley case, just like all things being equal, thinking about it, seems to provide us with a case of agent neutrality. Because it seems like we can truly say that right, the outcome that's best is the one that involves killing the 1, saving the 5, without having to do any relativizing, without having to make any essential reference to anybody. So that's at least an initial way of thinking about agent neutrality. So remember, so consequentialism is entailing that at least some good outcomes are agent neutral. And we know that, suppose we're just thinking about no bells and whistles, consequentialism, not making it sophisticated in any way, shape, or form. It seems committed in the original trolley case, doesn't it, to saying that the best thing to do is to kill the 1 and save the 5. Okay. Of course, non-consequentialists can deliver that result as well. But we'll get to non-consequentialism next week. So here I just try to capture what I was claiming using the original trolley case, what it means for a theory to be agent neutral with respect to goodness or good outcomes. So a theory is agent neutral with respect to goodness or good outcomes when, according to it, at least some goodness is objectively perspective independent. Right? Or it's just perspective independent would be fine too. Maybe I'll put the objectively in parentheses. And maybe have good consequences here. Good outcomes. So there's a kind of perspective independence when we think about agent neutrality. That might be an easy way of thinking about it. And contrast that with the agent relativity that I tried to capture. A theory is agent relative with respect to goodness when, according to it, all goodness is perspective dependent. So some theories of goodness, good outcomes, they're going to be agent relative. They say it doesn't make any sense to say blanketly that or generically that that some outcome is good, period. You couldn't evaluate that sentence as true or false according to such views. You have to consider from what perspective before you're in a position to say whether the sentence is true or false. Okay. So it's, at least I think maybe initially a little tricky to understand the difference between these views. I'm going to build in good consequences here real quick before I forget. Okay, so again, consequentialism is going to be an agent neutral theory, and according to it, at least some outcomes are going to be perspective independent. They're going to be good in some perspective independent way. Okay. So they don't have to even claim that all of them are, just some of them are. Okay, that's an important qualification to note. That's why I try to at least some include that in the way I try to quasi-define what it means for a theory to be agent with respect to goodness. Okay, so consequentialism maintains that the theory of morally right action is fundamentally agent neutral. So this is now getting into to right action. So we can understand agent neutrality in terms of outcomes, or good outcomes, but we can also understand agent neutrality in terms of the obligation side of things, the right action side of things. We know that for consequentialism, those connect in an essential and necessary way. So we can understand an ethical theory in terms of the normative theory developed by it. We can understand it either as agent neutral, agent relative, in terms of just thinking about, again, right action, wrong action. Okay. So again, consequentialism is going to maintain, or it's going to entail, that the theory of morally right action is fundamentally agent neutral. This bit about it being fundamentally agent neutral is an important qualification that we'll come back to. So just hang tight on that. And so thinking about the original trolley case, the moral rightness of an action makes no essential reference to any particular perspective. So let's just suppose that in the original trolley case, it's the morally right thing to do to flip the switch to kill the 1, thus saving the 5. The obligation in that case, according to the consequentialists, is agent neutral. And the way that can be captured is that the obligation in the situation makes no essential reference to any agent. So maybe that didn't go over well the first time. So let's go back up top. Have an image of it. So a way of thinking about the way in which the obligation here, again, this thing about consequentialism here, the obligation here is agent neutral, is to think about whether or not it matters who this is, given that these are all, strangers, right, to the person that's over here, as the case was set up, right? So just remember some of the details that were built in to the original trolley case, like where these are all strangers to the person in the trolley, you originally, according to Thompson setting up the case anyways, and Flip of Foots even. Does it matter who's here if these individuals are all, again, remember, they're morally upstanding individuals just like you are, but they're all strangers to you? Doesn't matter, right? This could be me, this could be you, this could be Jones, this could be a rioter, insurrectionist, this could be, right? Or maybe I just mess with the moral upstanding assumption that we were making with the original trolley case. I'll shut up though. I don't want to cause any troubles. So maybe this was an informant of a rioter, someone who's morally upstanding in that way. I don't know. So anyways, make the appropriate changes. So an obligation or a duty or even a reason, in the sense that, like, you have a reason to do something, in the sense that there's a moral reason to do something, can be agent neutral in that it makes no essential reference to anybody. It just holds, as it were, full stop, without having to make any qualifications about who has to live up to the obligation, or to whom their reason is a reason for, or something like that. Does that make sense? So it's the same kind of idea with respect to thinking about agent neutrality with respect to good outcomes. There's no there's no relativization, there's no qualification that's needed, right? When we assess whether or not the outcome is good, we don't have to say, well, from whose perspective, like, that doesn't even enter the picture, enter the equation. Likewise, when we say that it's an obligation in the original trolley case to flip the switch to kill the 1 in order to save the 5, we don't have to ask, well, who has the obligation, right? It's anybody who's in the circumstance would have, right, the obligation. And of course, the details that we built into the case are important. So then there's 2 levels of agent neutrality working for the consequentialists. Okay. Now let's, just by way of contrast, consider the mom trolley case, we'll call it. So we moved away from the original trolley. We're going to develop mom trolley. And let's see, scoot this over a little bit. So I'm in mom trolley. It's just like the original trolley case, but there's you in the trolley. And yep, you've guessed it, there's your mom as the one. Now, it does seem to matter here, doesn't it? That it's your mom. Now, set aside, the consequentialism for a moment. You might, in the grips of thinking about consequentialism, just say, no, it doesn't matter if you're like a strict consequentialist, but just think about like what you might ordinarily think morally about the case. That genuinely was you during the trolley, and that is your mom, and these are all 5 strangers to you. You might think that. I think it's quite natural to think that all bets are off. What's morally right has changed, or at the very least, what's morally permissible has changed, right? Or if that's not good enough, there's at least some moral pressure on you to kill the 5, right? Because that is your mom, after all. So when you think about this case independently of any theory that you've been taught, so you're not in the grips of any theory when you're thinking about the mom trolley case. So many people find this case to count against the verdict in the original trolley case. They say, no, in this case, you have moral reason to save your mom and kill the 5. And that reason might be strong enough for it to be obligatory for you to kill the 5 and save the 1 who is your mom. At the very least, many say that it's permissible for you to smash and kill the 5 to save your mom. And accordingly, this would go against, wouldn't it? This would go against just a flat-footed consequentialist view, wouldn't it? If this is right, if that's the correct moral verdict in thinking about this case. So the mom trolley case could also serve as a kind of challenge to consequentialism, at least flat-footed versions of it. Or as I put before, no bells and whistles versions of the view. But now, when you think about this case, let's just suppose that you have an obligation to save your mom and kill the 5 in this case. Well, now, right, the obligation makes a central reference to you. It's relativized to you because that's your mom, right? Like, suppose we think about the mom trolley case. So it remains your mom over here, but now the person in the trolley is just some stranger to everybody. Yeah. So now it's like the original trolley case again, isn't it? It's just that you happen to know that this is your mom over here. Right. If that's the case, then it looks like, so this is no longer you, it's just a stranger to everybody, all the track workers. Then it looks like you'd have to say, look, flip the switch, kill the 1, save the 5 in that case. So you kind of revert back to kind of agent neutrality. But insofar as it's you in here, in the trolley, then the reason to act, or the obligation, seems to make essential reference to you. It's relativized to you. Okay. It wouldn't relativize to me if I was in the trolley, for example. Well, maybe it would, because now I have this teacher relationship to you, and that would then mean that I should save your mom too. All right, okay, I'd do that. But you see the point here? You see how we can set up scenarios like this that seem quite natural in us ascribing an agent relative duty. Okay, because it matters who's here. And these agent relative duties are oftentimes grounded or have their foundation in the special relationships that we have with some as opposed to others. Yeah. So the mom case is a special case because we have special obligations to our mothers, just like they have those obligations to us. Same thing with like other family members you have, or close friends that you have, or pets that you have, et cetera, et cetera. Given these close relationships, it seems natural for us to say, just in ordinary moral thinking, that that special obligations hold, but they're special in the sense that they hold between the members of the relationship, right? Once you get outside those members, then right, the obligations don't hold in the same way. But that's just a way of talking about the way in which the obligations can be relativized to individuals, some individuals and not others. Okay, so this is a class case. Shaw doesn't discuss the mom trolley case. It's just, I think, one of the easiest ways of understanding what an agent relative duty is. And then I think sometimes when you understand what an agent relative duty is, then you can go back and you better understand what an agent neutral duty is. Okay. Understanding the contrast concept sometimes really helps. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. So, okay, the moral rightness of an action is agent relative when the rightness is relative to a particular agent or group of agents, as the case may be. So two kinds of agent neutrality, two kinds of agent relativity. So with respect to, we have outcomes, and we have right actions. Let's see what the chat point here is. Yeah, I mean, I think as I think I noted, the mom trolley case, it provides at least an initial challenge to consequentialists or consequentialism. There are consequentialists who could find ways of responding to try to deal with the intuition that's elicited by thinking about the mom trolley case. So maybe it'd be helpful to say how it is that a consequentialist could reply, because then that may help with just understanding consequentialism a little bit here. So let's see what I put on this slide. Yeah, right here. I'm going to come back to this expression fundamentally, or the theory being fundamentally agent neutral in a moment. So one way of going, if you're a consequentialist, is just to dig in your heels and say, morality doesn't care if that's your mom over there. You know what I mean? That's one way of going, is you just fight back and say, you've got a kind of small tribalism, built into your moral thinking that needs to be, purified or something like that. That's one way of going, say dig in the heels response. But another way of going is to say, well, no, in cases like these, at least sometimes, given the way you set the case, maybe it can be okay for you to save your mom and kill the 5. So in a way, then the consequentialist could say there are agent relative actions, there are agent relative right actions. The consequentialists can claim that. But here's what's crucial: they have to say that those agent relative obligations that we have, or those agent relative permissions, so if it's just permissible but isn't an obligation, those are all derived from the foundational truth or principle of consequentialism, right? So at rock bottom, the consequentialist theory is agent neutral in terms of its obligations, in terms of its permissions, et cetera, right? Fundamentally, it is at its core. So then, insofar as there are any agent relative obligations or permissions, they'd have to derive from the fundamental agent neutral claim, right? So it'd have to be the case that that allowing people, at least sometimes in cases like the mom trolley case, to save their loved ones, contributes in some way to the overall good consequences, right? And so you ask, well, how could that possibly be, that permitting or requiring someone in a mom trolley case to save their mom could end up being such that it contributes to the overall good consequences? Well, maybe the consequentialist says, oh, these mom trolley cases or these trolley cases, they're just so rare and contrived. Or maybe they might say these cases are developed with malice of forethought, right? They're designed or their particulars to be malicious toward consequentialism. But it might be just they're just so rare, right, in reality or something like that, or maybe even in logical space, that that allowing people, if they ever were to find themselves in a mom trolley case to save their mom, right, or at least allowing it in terms of being permitted for them to save their mom in mom trolley cases, right? But that's the way they're going to have to go, right? So either dig in your heels or somehow try to validate the intuition that's elicited from the mom trolley case. So that way it's either permitted or obligatory to save one's mom within the context of developing a fundamental agent neutral consequentialist theory. That'd be the strategy, at least another strategy. That's two of, maybe a half dozen possibilities, but at least gives you a sense of what could be said. So in original trolley, the moral rightness of the action makes no essential reference to any particular perspective. Okay, we already went through this. So I think we understand now what it means, as I mentioned and flagged a few moments ago, what it means to say that the theory is like fundamentally agent neutral when it comes to thinking about right action. So insofar as agent relativity is built into the theory, it have to derive from the agent neutral. So at bottom, the fundamentally agent neutral principle of consequentialism is going to be what? Can anybody tell me what it's going to be? You can blurt it out or type it in, whatever you want. If you don't know, I'll tell you in a minute. I just want to give you a chance to let me know.
Can you repeat the question?
What is that? What's that fundamental agent neutral, like moral principle of moral rightness for the consequentialist? Put in slogan form. This is it right here. Promote goodness, promote good consequences, promote good overall consequences, right? It's one of these. So this is the, just to put it just like simply for right now, I mean, this could be understood as just basically rock bottom, fundamental, agent neutral. And then insofar as, one can permissibly save one's mom in mom's trolley cases, right? You'd have to derive from this. That's the idea. Okay. Okay. So a way of thinking about consequentialism is it gives us this, sort of rock bottom fundamental principle. And then that's consistent with there being other principles in the theory that are countenanced. It's just that those all have to derive from the fundamental principle in some way, shape, or form, right? We'll come back to this point in a bit. Okay, so we talked about this one. Okay, so now let's talk about the independence of goodness. So we've got agent neutrality, two different kinds. One kind related to good outcomes or just outcomes generally, the other kind related to action, right action. And now we have the independence of goodness. The independence of goodness relative to rightness. So consequentialism is committed to goodness being independent of rightness. Okay, theoretically or logically independent of rightness. Okay. So what is good independent of its relation to rightness. So we're not going to define goodness, right, in terms of rightness. So there's goodness, and it has a kind of independence to rightness, even though when we develop our consequentialism, they come together. Okay. So like one important thing to keep in mind here as to why the consequentialist wants to insist on this point, because it might not initially seem clear as to why they want to do this. And this is a point that Shaw makes in his paper, is that the consequentialist wants to try to understand right action in terms of good consequences. So we have this idea of moral rightness. So this is kind of just to take a step back for a second. We have this idea of moral rightness. The consequentialist says we got to understand what that is. How can we understand what it means for an action to be morally right? And obviously, conversely, we have the idea of moral wrongness, and right, similar considerations would apply to it, making the appropriate changes, of course. We have this idea of moral rightness, and action being morally right. How can we understand that? How can we understand moral rightness? Well, the consequentialist says, well, we have a sense of like what good states of the world are, what good states of affairs are. So why don't we understand right actions in terms of right good states of the world, or the good consequences that emerge from our actions? It seems like a pretty promising project to work that out. It's elegant. We understand good states of the world, so we can understand this idea that seems more obscure to us, morally right actions, in relation to something that we understand perhaps better, good states of the world. And of course, many consequentialists end up saying things like, happiness or happy states of the world, or states of the world where the happiness of all, right, is promoted. Right? We understand those states at least fairly well. So then we could use concepts related to like these good states of the world to understand the concept of a morally right action. So there's elegance there, and there's quite a bit of unity that's there as well. The entire account of right action, of morally right action, gets understood in terms of this one unified thing, good states of the world, or happy states of the world, some such. So then the reason why the consequentialist is insistent on saying that we need to understand independent of rightness is because we don't want a circular account here. Right? If we say that goodness is not independent of rightness, so there's some kind of dependence of one on the other, we're thinking about good states of the world, right? Then when we're defining right action, we're going to end up having at least a partially circular definition, because our theory of right action then is going to be defined in terms of right goodness or good states of the world, good consequences. But if it turns out that good consequences, let's say, right, if those are to be understood at least partially in terms of right actions, then right, we're defining right action partly in terms of right action. That seems problematic, doesn't it? There's at least partial circularity. Right? We want to know what right action is in a non-circular way. So that's a reason for the insistence on this independence claim. Okay, we don't want a circular account. So here's another slogan to help out with this independence claim: the good is prior to the right. So the good is in some sense theoretically or logically prior to the right. So like all slogans, it's imperfect. So when I laid out the slogan for consequentialism, I said it's promote goodness. Well, that's imperfect, but it gives you an initial way of wrapping your mind around consequentialism, and then you go deeper and get more precise. But here we have this slogan that's supposed to help us understand the relationship between goodness on the one hand and rightness on the other, and we try to capture the independence of the two, um, using a slogan like this: "The good is prior to the right." The good has a kind of logical priority over the right too. So it's logically prior, it's logically independent of the right in the sense that we're not going to include right action in our concept of good consequences. But it's also going to be, theoretically and logically prior to the right in the sense that um, in order to work out our theory of right action, we have to first know what goodness is, right? Like in terms of like the details of the particular consequentialist theory that we develop. So the slogan's imperfect, but it guides us in understanding this independence claim. Okay. So the good is prior to the right. When we get to deontology or duty-based ethics, we're going to see that there's a principle that goes the other direction. The right is at least sometimes prior to the good. And so when we get there, we'll be able to contrast like that slogan with this one. So we'll spend some time doing that. So a way of understanding a commitment of the consequentialist ethical theory is it's committed to the claim that the good is prior to the right. It's committed to that slogan, properly unpacked, properly understood. Okay, now it's important to keep in mind that when we get to virtue ethics, which is after the deontology duty-based ethics, some versions of virtue ethics are committed to this slogan as well. So consequentialism isn't the only theory that's going to be committed to this. So we can't understand consequentialism solely in terms of this slogan, right? Because there's another theory that would accept it, another framework that is not consequentialist that would and does accept it. Okay. Okay, so now an important issue here. So which consequences are the relevant ones? The ones that actually are brought about or the ones that we expect to come about? So consequentialism claims that the rightness of an action is determined by its consequences. No surprise there. But an action's consequences occur in the future, right, relative to the performance of the action. At least typically. I imagine there could be simultaneous outcomes relative to the performance of an action. So then which consequences determine an action's normative moral status? Okay, which the actual consequences or the expected ones? Okay. So this futurity point, if I can put it that way, is important because when we go to act, we have to be thinking to ourselves, okay, what's the likely result or what are the likely results of my action? And it could be the case, couldn't it, that sometimes you've done everything in your power to ensure that the action that you're performing brings about, on balance, good consequences, but the world just doesn't cooperate. Right? Because there's you, and there's your deliberating, there's your calculating, there's your predicting, and you go and then there's the world, which is obviously much bigger than you, right, and has unpredictable elements that could come in and interfere, right, with your action and the consequences of your action. So which of these outcomes matter when we determine whether or not the action is morally right? If you're thinking about an action and you're thinking about its consequences, right? Just to simply capture, right, in diagram form, you have, this kind of sort of very simple, like or perhaps overly simple action theory, right? Captured by this diagram here, where you've got a reason or some antecedent of the action, right? Presumably mental states that you've put yourself in based on your deliberating and all the rest about what to do in a certain circumstance. So there seem to be these precursors to action, and then there's the action itself, and then there are the consequences of our actions. So these are the antecedents of action. Then there's the action, and then there's these things that follow from the action that are a future in relation to the action, at least in many cases. So then, if the actual consequences are the things that matter, then there's a sense in which we perform the action. We have to wait for the consequences to emerge. And then we could look back and be like, okay, our action was morally right, it was morally wrong, depending on what happened in the future relative to the performance of the action. But then if you go the expected route, then like, there's all this deliberation that could be going on, right? And then you arrive at a conclusion at the end of your deliberation, which is maybe a decision that you've made. On the basis of that decision, you form an intention, and then you perform the action. Well, presumably, you're going to have built into the intention when you're going to act the expected consequences of your action. Right? Insofar as you're thinking along consequentialist lines here, I think, okay, the pros and cons of performing an action, and those feature in your deliberations before you perform an action. So then we want to know whether this action is right. Are we going to focus on the actual consequences, these future things relative to the action, at least in many cases, or are we going to say that the action's moral status, maybe morally right or wrong or neutral, right, is determined by these antecedent things, these predictions that were formed, these reliable predictions that were formed, right, prior to the action, right, prior then to the consequences as well, right? Those are two possibilities, right? And the most common view is to go the expected route. And that's interesting, right? But that is the most common way of going, is to think about the expected consequences. So the consequentialists, they recognize that people often make reasonable predictions. Right? They do all the necessary and reliable things to bring about good consequences, the overall good consequences, prior to their acting. But then for whatever reason, the world doesn't cooperate. So this is our example, class example. Here's a Sabian and Nazi example. So this abstract stuff can be given some concreteness. Imagine, you're living in, Germany in the early 1940s. I know it's a stretch, but work with me. And you're cruising along, and you're by this river, and you notice that someone is trying to swim, but they're struggling. Maybe they're caught by an undercurrent, or they swim like a rock, like I do. But they're having a hard time swimming, and you're cruising along, and you start thinking to yourself, okay, I want to be a good consequentialist. Okay, saving lives, saving people's lives when they're drowning brings about good consequences typically. It's reliably does so. So you jump in, you save the person's life. You did everything right in terms of thinking about the pros and the cons and all the rest. You jump in, you save you grab the person, you bring the person to shore, you save the person's life, and you look down and they got that mustache, that funny mustache under the nose. You know what I'm talking about? The Hitler mustache? It's Hitler. You saved Hitler's life. In that case, you did everything right in terms of your deliberations before you jumped in to save the person's life, but the world didn't cooperate with you because you saved Hitler. So some consequentialists might want to say that the moral status of the action in this saving the Nazi example is that the action's right. It's morally right. Okay. Um, because in terms of expected consequences, you did everything right. You made all the relevant all the right calculations. Yeah, just the world doesn't cooperate with you. So it was not the actual consequences that matter, because obviously you saved Hitler's life and he's going to go on and kill 4,000 more people. Does that make sense? So in terms of actual consequences, right, if we were to go that route, then it looks like you did the morally wrong thing in that situation. Some consequentialists there think that that seems like it's the wrong result. But of course, consequentialists could go the actual consequences route and say, you did do the morally wrong thing, okay? Because the actual consequences are what matter. But what we're going to do is we're going to not hold you morally responsible for saving that person's life, or we're not going to morally blame you. That's the way in which we sometimes hold people morally responsible in a negative way. Another way in which we hold people morally responsible is we praise them for doing the good things. So those are possibilities, right? As we say, you did the morally wrong thing. Your action was morally wrong, but in terms of like our evaluation or the way we're going to treat you for doing the morally wrong thing, right? The actual consequentialist theorists might say, we're just not going to be hard on you, or might even be very kind to you, might even praise you because you did everything right in your deliberations in that circumstance. So there's different ways of going here, but the key takeaway ultimately is just that most consequentialists go the expected consequences route as opposed to the actual consequences route. Okay. Okay, and those who go the actual consequences route, they do want to try to say something about something to offset the fact that it does seem kind of harsh to say that someone did the wrong thing, despite the fact they did everything right going into the action. Okay. Now, one way in which, and this is, I think, maybe a segue point here, one way in which it could be said that someone does all the right things going into performing an action, such that those antecedents of action led them to a high probability or high likelihood that the outcomes were going to be overall good, right? Some of those processes just involve knowing the very general moral rules that have crystallized in our ordinary lives, our ordinary moral lives that we get taught by our parents and our society and all the rest, right? So it needn't have been, for example, that in the saving the Nazi example, that the person thought to himself, geez, okay, so the probability is like 0.9 that I saved someone's life who was good, and it's going to be 100 units of goodness if I do that. Then you do the math, right? And then you consider like the 0.1 probability, or the 0.0001 probability that I'll be saving Hitler, times negative 10,000 units of badness, right? And then you do all that crazy math in your head, and okay, save the person's life. Okay, just the probabilities tell you to go that direction. It needn't be that complicated, right? The consequentialist can say, the thing to be thinking about is what should one ordinarily do in situations like that? Right? Just given ordinary morality, and the ordinary thing to do in morality is just to follow the moral rule, save someone's life when you can, right? Because that tends to be the right thing to do. It's just rare that you save a psychopath's life, right? A mass murderer's life, right? In these kinds of situations. I mean, you couldn't see the mustache, right? So it needn't be as complicated as you did all these sophisticated calculations, or you had to pull out your smartphone with your calculator to do all the calculations before you dive in. It's just there's this general moral rule that, and then the consequentialist can say what explains that moral rule as being justifiable, and all the rest supposing it's a justifiable moral rule to save someone's life when they're drowning. It derives from just the consequentialist principle: promote goodness. One of the ways in which our experience has taught us that we can promote goodness is by saving lives. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to be this complicated, calculated or a long time ago where they had to break out their abacus to do the calculations or whatever, right? And we could go much faster now. You can use the scientific calculator if you turn it sideways, right? On your iPhones. If it's really sophisticated calculating that needs to happen. So just to give you a sense of how the expected utility works, though, in case it was like a matter of like, let's do the pros and cons and think about the expected outcomes and the probability, right, that those outcomes emerge and the values associated with them. So action A and action B, just in the abstract here, two possible outcomes. Outcome 1 and 2 from doing action A is going to be that there's an 80% chance or 0.8 chance that 100 units of goodness, utils, let's call them, would occur. And then the second possible outcome for performing action A, just to simplify things, would be there's a 20% chance or 0.2 chance that 120 units of goodness would be brought about. So action A has these two possible outcomes, and then action B has these two possible outcomes. There's a 70% chance that there's like negative units of goodness or badness. There's going to be 100 units of badness brought about, so negative 100 utils. And the second possible outcome from action B is that there's a 30% chance of 50 units of goodness being brought about. Okay, it might be way more complicated in the real life, but this just gave us a simple example where there's multiple possible outcomes related to an action, and you're trying to figure out whether to do action A or to do action B. Okay. Let's just maybe action A is giving money to the homeless fella outside of the 7-Eleven. Yeah. And action B is telling him to have a good day, giving him no money. You know what I mean? Just possibilities, simple example to think about. Okay. So then we continue. Again, these are just the outcomes re-represented on the slide. And then what we do here is we just consider the outcomes. We do the math. So we end up with possible outcome 1, action A. When we do the math here, we get 80 units, don't we? 0.8 times 100 is just 80. And then 0.5 of 120 is just 60. So we get 80 plus 60 units of goodness, good consequences, of course, 140 units of goodness. And with action B, so remember action A was giving the tenner to the homeless fellow outside the 7-Eleven after you just bought a big gulp or whatever. Remember action B was just saying, hey, have a good day. No money for you. I'm sorry, buddy. You take off with your big gulp into your car and never see him again. Well, action B here, 0.7 units of minus, or 70% chance of minus 100 utils. Well, that gets you minus 70 units of goodness, or 70 units of badness, if you want to go that route. Dis value, sometimes it's put that way. And then 0.3 times 50 utils is 16.7 units of goodness, 30% of 50 units. So then when we do the math here, 53.3 units of badness or minus 53.3 units of goodness, however you want to put it. So then we compare these n values, 140 units with 53.3 units, minus 53.3 units. Clearly we should do action A. Okay. So that's how we do expected utility. That's how we do the relevant math. Now, many consequentialists are going to say that we don't have to do all this in many cases, okay? But in cases where we have to, here we go. So this is the segue point that I've already anticipated, the moral rules. So according to consequentialism, the difficulty in determining precise expected outcomes is not a problem. You can imagine, right? You're walking out of 7-Eleven with your big gulp. Right? You got to figure out, you got to do all this math. What are you going to do? Go to your car, do the math, and then come back? I don't know. It's going to be very difficult in many cases. Like morality, at least in our moral encounters, maybe I put it that way. Our moral encounters in many circumstances require that we act quickly and make judgments quickly and act quickly. And we're not going to be able to do that if we're going to have to do this kind of calculating all the time. So a kind of challenge to consequentialism that's pretty standard is that, look, we need to be calculating outcomes all the time. And some of the calculations, given that we're talking about overall consequences, like the overall outcomes when we're acting, are going to be pretty tough to work out. Maybe impossible to work out in lots of cases, especially in cases of time crunches. Right? In the case where you see someone drowning, you don't have time to do the probability, to work out the probabilities, to do the math. Remember? So the consequentialist needs to reply to these kinds of concerns, and many of them claim that the difficulty in determining precise expected outcomes is not really a problem. And they, as I anticipated, will claim something like this. But we're mostly just to follow moral rules, which by and large, but not perfectly, bring about good consequences when followed. So many like consequentialists, like the ones who are currently working out sophisticated versions of consequentialism, they're going to say things like, look, we have like our moral code, and the moral code might be diverse in a society in the sense that there's lots of overlap in the moral codes, or there's lots of different moral codes, but then there could be quite a bit of overlap in the moral codes, and you might see in our moral codes things like, or the overlapping portions of our moral codes, when you take a whole bunch of them together, you might see things like you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't kill, right? And you should be good to your neighbor, you should help others when they're in need. These are just sort of basic things that are going to be in our moral code. But what the consequentialist is gonna say is like, look, we're going to keep those features of our moral code, whatever their origin, in place insofar as they contribute to bringing about good consequences, you see? So the consequentialists can readily say, like, look, we have moral codes. We have a contemporary moral code, let's just say, or we have contemporary moral codes with significant overlap, right? And we might call that the moral code, right? If we want to, just for simplicity's sake. The consequentialists can say, yeah, that moral code derives from sort of our religious backgrounds. It derives from our from ancient philosophies that we subscribe to that still last. See what I mean? There could be all kinds of things that contribute to the moral codes that we have. And the consequentialist is going to come in and say, like, look, we have a standard, we have a way in which we can assess the moral codes, evaluate them. Here's how we evaluate them. Here's our rock bottom moral principle. Promote goodness, promote good consequences, promote overall good consequences, right? And they're going to develop their consequentialist view in more sophisticated ways, of course. And what they're going to do is they're going to take the various principles or the various obligations and permissions that we find in our moral code, and we're going to assess them in relation to the consequentialist fundamental principle, you see. And what's going to happen is in some cases, some of the principles that would be part of our overlapping moral code, some of those are going to drop out. The consequentialist is going to say, you need to get rid of those because those actually don't contribute to overall goodness. But there might be many things that remain in the moral code. Does that make sense? When they do the rigorous work, the rigorous empirical work of figuring out which aspects of our moral code actually contribute to the promotion of goodness. overall goodness. So the consequentialist can just by and large say, like, look, the fact that we have this fundamental principle doesn't mean that there aren't other principles that we can just regularly appeal to when we go to act. So, other moral theorists are going to sometimes try to challenge the consequentialist by saying, like, look, we just follow like these very natural moral principles that are part of our moral code, and we're not doing this calculating thing. And the consequentialists will reply and say, yeah, that's exactly right. But you have to, many of them might also say something like, but the correct moral code is going to be the one whereby we've learned enough from our experiences to know the tendencies of our actions in terms of their outcomes, right? And experience has been a great teacher to us. Experience can be a great teacher to us, wherein experience has taught us what moral rules, what moral principles, what moral permissions tend to bring about goodness, tend to bring about good consequences. And there you go. Some of the older consequentialist utilitarian thinkers from like the 19th century, like Mill and others, they tend to think that somehow our moral code like was implicitly shaped by, at least in part, consequentialist utilitarian thinking, right? Just implicit in our thinking about things. Okay, we didn't even go that far in our thinking about things, but contemporary consequentialists very often won't go that far, but they could, to some degree, do so if they wanted to. Okay, so moral rules can be central to thinking about a consequentialist ethical system. So we don't have to do all the expected utility work. In a sense, many of them could say, that kind of gets done empirically over time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Okay, so I think this is a good place to stop. I'll represent this idea about moral rules in relation to moral code more next time. I've got some diagrams and things like that that will be helpful. And then what we'll do is we'll segue to utilitarianism as being the most common form of consequentialism, and then deal with it and some challenges to it and how they tend to respond to those challenges. So I'll stop there unless there are questions or comments about anything. No? Okay, so I'm going to stop recording. I wish you all a great night, and I'll see you all on Thursday.